Margarita sat at her desk, going through the documents of the next quarterly report. The office was in its usual morning bustle, the whirring of the printer, the muffled conversations of colleagues, the ringing of phones. She ran her hand over her temples, trying to focus on the numbers. For the past few weeks, she'd struggled to concentrate on her work. Something had subtly changed in her life, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. A knock on the door interrupted her musings. Gabriel Mendoza, her boss, appeared on the doorstep, a tall man with dark hair streaked with graying and an intense look in his brown eyes. "Margarita, excellent work with the Valdivia project. The client is completely satisfied with the results," he said, taking a seat in the chair across from her. "Thank you, Senor Mendoza. I tried to take every nuance into account," Margarita replied, machine adjusting the already perfectly laid papers on the table. "That is why I want to assign you a new project. It could be a major step in your career." Gabriel placed a thick folder with a dark blue cover on the table. Marguerite nodded, feeling the familiar anxiety building up inside. Another project meant even more time in the office, even less time at home. Then again, had home brought her any joy lately? The day stretched on slowly. Margarita immersed herself in her work, occasionally distracted by calls and meetings. By 4 o'clock, she felt her eyes begin to water from staring at the computer monitor. It was at times like this that she felt her 40 years especially acutely. Leaving the office, she got into her silver Volkswagen. Her hands rested habitually on the steering wheel, but she was in no hurry to start the car. Through the windshield, she watched passers-by hurrying along the street, women with supermarket bags, school children with backpacks, office workers with briefcases. Everyone had their own lives, their own problems, their own secrets. The drive home took longer than usual. The traffic in this part of town was getting worse. Margarita turned on the radio, trying to distract herself from her intrusive thoughts. Music poured from the speakers, but she could hardly distinguish the words of the songs. At home, she was greeted by Rosita, a golden Labrador with kind eyes and a wagging tail. The dog happily ran up to her mistress, poking his wet nose into her palms. Marguerite leaned over to pet her, feeling some of the tension go away at the touch of the soft fur. "Is Raoul home?" she asked the housekeeper as she made her way to the kitchen. "No, Senora. Senor Ortega called and said he would be late at the office," she answered as she wiped the dishes. Margarita nodded, trying not to show disappointment. Lately, Raoul had been staying late at work more and more often. His small auto parts import company had suddenly taken off, demanding more and more of the owner's attention. At least that's how he explained his late returns. Changing into comfortable pants and a loose blouse, Marguerite pulled out a leash. Rosita immediately perked up, realizing she was about to go for a walk. The evening air was warm and humid, typical weather for their small town in central Mexico. They walked slowly through the familiar streets. Rosita sniffed bushes and trees, occasionally glancing at her mistress. Margarita mechanically went over in her head the events of the past day, the praise of her boss, a new project, endless meetings. Everything as usual, but why did she feel so anxious? When she returned home, she found Raoul in the living room. He was sitting in his favorite armchair, looking at something on his phone. When he heard his wife's footsteps, he hurriedly put the phone away in his pocket. "How was your day?" he asked, rising to meet her. "Not bad. Mendoza is pleased with the work on the Valdivia project," Margarita replied as she made her way into the kitchen. Her hands habitually reached for the kettle. Evening tea had long since become a ritual. "That's good," Raoul replied absent-mindedly, following her. "I'm doing great too. There are some new clients. I'll need to reorganize the office a bit." Marguerite listened to her husband half-heartedly, setting the cups on the table. 20 years of marriage had taught her to pretend to follow the conversation closely, even when her thoughts were far away. That ability was proving useful more and more often now. They ate dinner in relative silence, exchanging occasional phrases about work and household trivia. Raoul seemed a little nervous, glancing at his phone every now and then, but maybe it seemed that way to her. After dinner, Marguerite went upstairs to the bedroom, leaving her husband in the living room. She stood in front of the mirror, examining her reflection. Her dark hair still glistened. Her brown eyes had no wrinkles. Her figure was still slender. The years had favored her, but something in her own gaze alarmed her. Maybe it was the fatigue lurking in the depths of her eyes, or a faint shadow of worry. Rosita settled down on her bedding by the bed, resting her head on her paws. The dog watched her mistress carefully, as if sensing her mood. Margarita crouched down beside her, scratching the Labrador behind the ear. "What's happening to us, Rosita?" she asked quietly. The dog only sighed heavily in response, covering her eyes. The weekend morning began with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Raoul, as usual, had gotten up before his wife and was now rattling the dishes in the kitchen. Marguerite came downstairs wrapped in her robe. Rosita followed, tapping her claws on the wooden steps. "Good morning," Raoul smiled, setting a cup of steaming coffee on the table. "I decided to be a model husband today." Marguerite smiled back, noting to herself that such surprises had become rare. Such mornings used to be more frequent. Her husband prepared breakfast. They sat at the table for a long time discussing plans for the day. Now their breakfast together had become a hurried exchange of phrases between sips of cooling coffee. "I have a proposal." Raoul sat down across from her, looking at his wife intently. "Your birthday is in a month. Let's have a real celebration, shall we? You deserve something special." Marguerite sipped her coffee, mulling over his words. For the past few years they had celebrated her birthday modestly. Dinner for the two of them at a restaurant or a small party with her closest friends. "And what do you suggest?" she asked, trying to hide her surprise. "A big celebration. We'll invite everyone, your co-workers, my business partners, friends. We'll order catering, musicians. I'll take care of the organization. You won't have to worry about anything." Raoul's voice sounded strangely enthusiastic. "Are you sure? You don't usually like such large-scale events." Marguerite looked at her husband carefully. "Just thought it was time for a change. We've been too bogged down in routine lately." He shrugged, averting his gaze. Marguerite agreed, though something about her husband's behavior alarmed her. Perhaps it was the way he avoided making eye contact with her, or the way he tapped his fingers nervously on the table, a gesture he had recently acquired. The day dragged on slowly. Raoul had left on business, saying he needed to meet with potential clients. It seemed strange on a day off, but Marguerite didn't argue. She went about her household chores. She did the laundry, dusted, watered the flowers on the windowsills. In the evening, as the sun began to sink, coloring the sky orange, she heard her husband's voice. Raoul was talking on the phone on the balcony, a habit he'd picked up in recent months. Marguerite hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but overhearing the occasional scraps of phrases made her freeze at the balcony door. "Of course, I'll arrange everything. No, she won't guess anything. It will be a special evening." Raoul's voice sounded soft, intimate, the way he had once spoken to her at the beginning of their relationship. Marguerite stepped carefully away from the door, feeling her heart begin to beat more frequently. She walked mechanically to the kitchen and turned on the water, trying to drown out the sounds of the conversation. Her hands trembled as she poured herself a glass of water. Raoul returned to the room a few minutes later, as if nothing had happened. He hummed something to himself while checking messages on his phone. "Who were you talking to?" Marguerite asked, trying to keep her voice sounding casual. "Eh? With a client. Discussing deliveries for the next quarter," he replied without lifting his eyes from the screen. The lie sounded easy, natural, as if it wasn't the first time he'd practiced it. Marguerite felt her insides tighten. She nodded silently and left the room, calling Rosita to her. The evening walk with the dog had been her salvation. The cool air helped clear her head, put her thoughts in order. Rosita, as if sensing her mood, kept close to her, occasionally glancing at her with a concerned look. Marguerite went over the events of the last few months in her mind. Now that suspicion had crept into her soul, she began to notice details she had previously ignored. Frequent delays at work, strange phone conversations, a sudden preoccupation with his appearance. Raoul had recently updated his entire closet and joined a gym. When she returned home, she found her husband at his laptop. He was typing something intently, but hastily closed the lid when she appeared. "Working?" she asked, unbuckling Rosita's leash. "Yeah, got some reports to finish." He reached up, stretching his neck. "How was the walk?" "Fine." Marguerite walked to the bathroom and turned on the water, watching the jets crash against the white porcelain of the sink. The mirror reflected her face, calm, unperturbed. Only there was something new in her eyes, a wariness that hadn't been there before. She pulled a jar of cream from her locker and mechanically applied it to her face. It was an evening ritual that helped her maintain a semblance of normalcy when her insides were turning over with anxiety. At night, she couldn't sleep for a long time. Raoul lay beside her, his back turned to her. His breathing was steady, but she could feel that he was awake too. It was as if an invisible wall had grown between them, a wall of suspicion and misunderstanding. Rosita murmured softly on her bed, the only sound that seemed genuine in the silent room. Carmela always chose to meet at the same cafe on the corner of Central Square. The small establishment, with its worn wooden tables and old-fashioned curtains on the windows, seemed frozen in time. Margarita was 15 minutes late. Traffic in the city center was getting worse every year. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sinking into the chair across from her friend. Carmela waved her hand, showing it was nothing, and pushed a cup of hot coffee toward her. "I already ordered your favorite cappuccino, and those cream cakes you always get." Carmela looked at her friend carefully. "You look tired." Marguerite ran her hand over her face as if trying to wipe away the traces of a sleepless night. She had hardly slept since the conversation she had overheard, going over possible explanations in her head. "Carmela, I think Raoul has someone." The words came out abruptly, though she had planned to start the conversation from afar. Her friend slowly set the cup down on the saucer, keeping her eyes on Marguerite. "What made you think that?" Marguerite recounted the strange conversation on the balcony, the sudden proposal for a grand feast, the small details that now added up to a disturbing picture. "He's been staying late at work more often," she continued, stirring sugar into the cooling coffee. "Constantly checking his phone, and when I come into the room he puts it away immediately. Joined a gym, updated his closet." Carmela listened silently, only the wrinkle between her eyebrows growing deeper. "You know, these all do seem like classic signs of infidelity," she finally said. "But we need to take a closer look before we jump to conclusions." The waitress brought more coffee. Marguerite watched the dark liquid fill the cup, inhaling the familiar aroma. How many conversations had she and Carmela had here in their 20 years of friendship? How many secrets had they confided in each other? "And how does he act at home? I mean, in normal life?" Carmela pulled a plate of untouched brownies toward her. "Distant, like he's thinking somewhere far away." Marguerite was quiet. "You know, he used to always talk about his business, about problems in the office, about new contracts. Now he just keeps it to generalities." "And how long ago did it start?" "About 3 months ago. Maybe a little more." Marguerite strained her memory. "Yeah, that's about when he started staying at work more often. Said business was growing. There were new clients." Carmela tapped her spoon thoughtfully on the rim of her cup. "We should check to see if he's really in the office when he says he's running late." "Are you suggesting we follow him?" Marguerite grumbled. The very thought of it seemed humiliating. No, why be so rude? Carmela shook her head. But you could stop by his office sometime. Like bring him lunch or some papers he supposedly forgot at home. Marguerite remained silent, looking out the window. Passers-by hurried along the street. A flower seller arranged brightly colored bouquets on a tray. An old shoe-shine man dozed in the shade of an awning. An ordinary day in their small town where everyone knows each other and everyone watches each other. You know what else is weird? She turned to her friend. This sudden birthday party. Raoul never liked noisy gatherings, and then all of a sudden he offered to throw something big with musicians, catering. And he said he'd organize it himself. Carmela picked up on that. Yeah, that's suspicious, especially considering that conversation you overheard. They sat in the cafe for another hour. Carmela asked about details, and together they analyzed every little detail, every change in Raoul's behavior. When they finally said goodbye, Marguerite's head was spinning with speculation. In the evening, when she returned home, she found her husband gathering documents into a briefcase. He was hastily folding the papers, glancing at his watch every now and then. Urgent meeting with a client, he explained, noticing her gaze. Just got the call, need to go right away. At 8 p.m. Marguerite tried to keep her voice sounding neutral. Yes, they flew in from the capital just an hour ago. Raoul grabbed his jacket. Don't expect me for dinner. She watched him hurriedly leave the house and get into the car. There was a nervousness in his movements that hadn't been there before. Or had she just not noticed? Rosita walked over to her, rubbing her nose in the palm of her hand. Marguerite absently stroked the dog, thinking about Carmela's words. Maybe she really should take a closer look. Check to see where her husband really went in the evenings? She went into Raoul's office, a small room filled with files. On the desk was a day planner that had been forgotten in her haste. Marguerite opened it, flipped through the pages. Meetings, calls, notes were written in her husband's neat handwriting. But the entries stopped last week. The last pages were pristinely clean. In the bottom drawer of the desk she found old reports, receipts, contracts. Nothing suspicious, the usual business records. But then, why had there been so many urgent meetings? Why had he stopped writing them down in the diary? Marguerite carefully put everything back in its place and left the office. Rosita followed her, whimpering softly. It was time to go for an evening walk. They wandered slowly through the familiar streets. The evening air was filled with the odors of jasmine and roasted chestnuts. From the open windows came voices, music, the clinking of dishes, the usual sounds of family life. Marguerite thought about how her own family life had changed. Not so long ago, everything had seemed so simple and clear. Now every gesture, every word of her husband aroused suspicion. Margarita sat in the car parked in front of her husband's office and looked at the clock. The time was nearing noon. The lunch break was about to begin. On the front seat was a bag of food from Raoul's favorite restaurant. The pretext for the visit seemed natural enough. The caring wife had decided to please her husband with lunch. She fixed her makeup in the rearview mirror, checked her hair. Lately she had been paying more attention to her appearance, as if preparing for an invisible battle. The dark blue dress emphasized her figure. The high-heeled shoes added confidence. Raoul's office occupied the second floor of a 3-story building in the city's business district. Glass doors, modern interior, polite secretaries. Everything spoke of a successful business. Margarita didn't come here often, usually on official occasions, corporate holidays, business dinners. Good afternoon, Senora Ortega. The girl at the front desk said hello. Senor Ortega is in a meeting right now, but should be free soon. I'll wait. Margarita smiled, settling into a chair in the reception area. From here she had a view of the long corridor leading to the staff offices. Through the glass partitions, she could see people working at computers, talking on the phone, discussing something at the coffee machine. Just a normal office day. It looked exactly as Raoul had told her. A growing company, lots of work, new contracts. The sound of heels on the marble floor caught her attention. A young woman was walking down the hallway, tall, slender, with long dark hair. Her red skirt was perhaps too short for the office and her blouse too tight. She paused at the printer, tapping her foot as she waited for the documents. At that moment, Raoul came out of the conference room. He looked tired, but his face visibly perked up when he saw the woman at the printer. "Paulina, how's the Mendoza contract coming along?" His voice sounded soft, almost intimate. "Almost finished, Senor Ortega." She turned to him, and Margarita noticed the woman pitch forward slightly, shortening the distance between them. "I wanted to show you the final version." "Come by my office in half an hour," Raoul smiled, his gaze sliding over Paulina's figure. "We'll discuss the details." Marguerite watched the scene, feeling everything go cold inside. She knew that look in her husband's eyes, that special smile. Once they had been meant only for her. Now he was looking that way at this young woman who was clearly enjoying his attention. Paulina said something, lowering her voice, and Raoul laughed, softly but sincerely. They stood too close together for a business conversation, creating an almost palpable field of intimacy around them. Marguerite stood up, clutching her lunch bag in her hands. She wanted to leave unnoticed, but at that moment Raoul turned his head and saw her. A look of surprise flashed across his face, quickly replaced by feigned joy. "Darling, what are you doing here?" He hastily backed away from Paulina, who had also noticed Marguerite's presence and was now pretending to be completely absorbed in her papers. "Thought I'd bring you some lunch," Margarita smiled, holding out the package. "But I see you're busy." "No, not at all." Raoul walked over to her and tried to hug her, but she deftly ducked away, pretending to adjust her purse. "Thank you. That's so sweet of you." "I won't interrupt." She turned to leave. "You have a meeting with Paulina, I think?" She said the last words particularly clearly, noticing how the young woman flinched at the sound of her name. Raoul tried to say something, but Marguerite was already walking toward the elevator with her head held high. Only in the car did she allow herself to exhale. Her hands trembled as she tried to put the key in the ignition. The picture before her eyes was Raoul and Paulina, their soft laughter, their glances. It all came together, the evening delays at work, the strange phone conversations, the sudden desire for a grand celebration. She made it home on autopilot, barely noticing the road. Rosita met her at the door, wagging her tail, but Marguerite didn't even pet the dog. She went straight to the bedroom, threw off her shoes, and sat on the edge of the bed. Now that she knew for sure, the pain was sharper. She remembered how she'd met Raoul, how he'd courted her, how he'd proposed. 20 years of life together, holidays, traveling, quiet evenings at home. And now it was all ruined because of a young woman in a skirt that was too short. The ringing of the phone made her wince. Carmela's name popped up on the screen. "How's it going?" Her friend's voice sounded worried. "Have you been to the office?" "Yes." Marguerite took a deep breath. "I saw them together. Her name is Paulina. She works in his office." Silence hung on the other end of the line. Then Carmela let out a quiet whine, which happened to her very rarely. "Should I come over?" she asked. "No." Marguerite shook her head, though her friend couldn't see it. "I need to think things over." The birthday party was a week away. Raoul had developed a flurry of activity to organize the party, calling the caterer, making arrangements with musicians, compiling a guest list. Marguerite watched this fuss with a strange, detached feeling, as if everything was happening in some play where she was playing the role of a happy wife. The morning began as usual with a cup of coffee and a walk with Rosita. The dog sensed her mood and tried to stay close to her, now and then snuggling against her legs. Margarita stroked her head, thinking about the upcoming holiday. "I've invited all the business partners and key employees," Raoul announced over breakfast, going over the list on his phone. "There will be about 50 people." Marguerite stirred her cooled coffee without looking up. She knew that Paulina would be among those key employees. 2 weeks had passed since the visit to her husband's office, but the scene at the printers still stood before her eyes. "The caterer offered several menu options," Raoul continued, not noticing her silence. "I chose seafood and meat, and I ordered your favorite chocolate cake." "Thank you, darling," she forced herself to smile. "You take such great care of everything." Raoul looked up from the phone, something akin to guilt flickering in his gaze for a second. But the moment passed, and he plunged back into organizational matters. The day stretched slowly. At work, Margarita could not concentrate on the documents. The numbers blurred before her eyes. Words lost their meaning. Every now and then she caught the concerned looks of her colleagues. "Are you all right, Senor Ortega?" the secretary asked, bringing in the paperwork. The secretary asked, bringing in another stack of papers. "You look a little pale today." "I'm fine." Margarita tried to put some pep in her voice. "Just a lot of work." After lunch, Carmela called. "How are you?" There was concern in her friend's voice. "Fine." Marguerite stepped back to the window so no one could hear the conversation. "Raoul is getting ready for the holiday. He's inviting all his employees." "Her too?" Carmela didn't bother to say the name, but both knew who they were talking about. "Of course. She's a key employee." Marguerite couldn't contain the bitterness in her voice. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet, but I'm not going to let them ruin my holiday." When she returned home, she found the florist there, a young guy with tattoos on his arms. He was discussing decorating the house with flowers with Raoul. "Honey, look at this." Her husband handed her a clipboard with pictures of floral arrangements. "What do you think?" Marguerite looked through the photos, noting to herself that Raoul had never been interested in flowers before. Maybe it was Paulina who had taught him the shades of roses and the right combination of orchids. "Everything is beautiful," she handed the clipboard back. "I trust your taste completely." In the evening, the waiters arrived to set a trial table and coordinate the menu. The house was filled with the smells of food, the clinking of dishes, voices. Marguerite sat in a corner of the living room, watching Raoul taste the dishes, discuss table arrangements, choose tablecloths and serving pieces. "Try the shrimp in mango sauce," he brought his fork to her lips. This intimate gesture, which had been so natural before, now seemed fake. She obediently opened her mouth, but didn't taste it. All her attention was focused on her husband's hands, the same hands that had probably caressed Paulina a few hours ago in the office. At night, she couldn't sleep for a long time. Raoul lay beside her, his breathing calm and even. Rosita settled down on her bedding, occasionally lifting her head to look at her mistress. Marguerite thought about the upcoming party. 50 people, colleagues, friends, business partners. Everyone would be smiling, congratulating her, giving her gifts. And among them will be Paulina, young, beautiful, confident. She would look at Raoul with that special look that Margarita had noticed in the office. The next morning, the musicians arrived to discuss the repertoire. The quartet played a few songs, and Marguerite caught herself thinking that she couldn't even hear the music, only Paulina's laughter, the same soft, intimate laughter she used to respond to Raoul's jokes. "Do you like it?" her husband asked when the musicians had finished playing. "Yes, very much," she lied, having no idea what they had been playing for the last 15 minutes. Day by day, the house transformed for the holiday. There were new curtains in the living room, sparkling crystal glasses in the sideboard, fresh flowers in vases. Raoul had thought of every detail with a meticulousness he'd never noticed before. "I want this day to be special," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders. Those touches made her want to pull away, but she forced herself to stand still. Carmela called every day, offering to help, but Marguerite refused. She had to go through it herself, smiling, accepting her husband's concern, pretending she knew nothing about his relationship with Paulina. 2 days before the party, her new dress was brought in, dark green silk, perfectly emphasizing her figure. Raoul insisted on ordering it from a famous designer. "You will be the most beautiful," he said as she tried on the dress. Marguerite looked at her reflection in the mirror and thought about how beauty was a poor defense against betrayal. She was still beautiful, but that didn't stop her husband from being infatuated with the young employee. The birthday party began with the scent of fresh flowers. The florists arrived early in the morning, turning the house into a real garden: white orchids, cream roses, green fern branches. Marguerite watched them work, mechanically stroking Rosita, who hovered nearby, smelling the unfamiliar odors. The waiters scurried about the house, setting tables, arranging dishes, hanging garlands. The sounds of their work mingled with the soft music the sound engineer had turned on as he checked the equipment. "Everything's going according to plan." Raoul appeared beside her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You need to start packing. In 3 hours, the first guests will arrive." Marguerite went up to the bedroom where the hairdresser, a young woman with nimble fingers and a habit of humming to herself, was already waiting. The process of creating the hairstyle took over an hour. Marguerite sat still, looking in the mirror and thinking about the fact that today she was going to meet Paulina for the first time since the incident at the office. The makeup was being done by another makeup artist, silent and focused. She was working on Marguerite's face, creating a flawless look: perfect skin, expressive eyes, elegant curve of the lips. It was like a mask under which to hide all her feelings. The dark green dress lay on her body like a second skin. Marguerite wore her favorite emerald earrings, a gift from Raoul for their 15th anniversary. High-heeled shoes completed the look. "You look stunning," Raoul said as he peeked into the bedroom. He was already in his new suit, a dark gray that fit his trim figure perfectly. The gym had clearly done him some good. The first guests started arriving at 7 sharp. Marguerite greeted them at the entrance, accepting congratulations and gifts, which were immediately picked up by her assistant and taken to a specially designated room. The house was filled with voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. A quartet of musicians played soft music, creating a pleasant background for conversations. Waiters glided between guests with trays laden with hors d'oeuvre and champagne. Carmela was one of the first to arrive. She hugged her friend tightly, whispering in her ear, "I'm right here. If you need anything, give me a sign." Marguerite squeezed her hand gratefully. The presence of her friend gave her strength, helped her to keep her face, to smile at her guests, to keep up small talk. Señor Mendoza, her boss, came with his wife, an elegant woman in a pearl gray dress. They presented Margarita with an exquisite white gold necklace. "You deserve the very best," he said, kissing her hand. "You are the jewel of our company." Raoul's colleagues arrived in groups, men in expensive suits, women in evening gowns. They all knew each other, forming a tight circle of their small town's business elite. At 9 o'clock, when the party was in full swing, Paulina appeared. She looked stunning in a red dress that would have been more appropriate for a nightclub than a family celebration. Her appearance caused a slight commotion among the guests. Men escorted her with glances. Women whispered, "Happy birthday, Señora Ortega." Paulina approached Margarita with a flawless smile on her painted lips. "Allow me to present you with a small gift." She held out an elegantly wrapped box. Marguerite accepted it with an equally impeccable smile, noting to herself how Paulina's fingers trembled as she handed the gift over. "That's very kind of you," Marguerite pronounced. "You shouldn't have bothered." "Why, it's such a small thing," Paulina made a graceful gesture with her hand. "I hope you like it. It's an exclusive perfume. It's made to order in a small atelier in Paris." Out of the corner of her eye, Marguerite noticed Raoul, who was standing nearby, tense. He took a step in their direction, but was intercepted by one of the guests. Paulina stood nearby for a few seconds, as if waiting for something, then disappeared into the crowd of guests. Marguerite handed the box to her assistant, trying not to think about what might lie beneath the elegant packaging. The festivities continued. Waiters served hot dishes, musicians played dance tunes, and the guests cheered. Marguerite moved from group to group, keeping up conversations, accepting congratulations, pretending to be the happy birthday girl. She tried not to look in Paulina's direction, but every now and then she caught a glimpse of her red dress. The young woman clearly felt like a fish in water, laughing, flirting, dancing. Several times she found herself next to Raoul, and though they hardly spoke, the air between them tingled with tension. At 11 o'clock in the evening, the cake was brought out, a three-tiered dark chocolate wonder decorated with fresh flowers. The guests gathered around and sang a song of congratulations. Margarita blew out the candles under the camera flashes, making a wish she would never say out loud. "Speech," the guest demanded. Margarita raised her champagne glass. "Thank you all for coming to share this evening with me." Her voice sounded smooth and confident. "Thank you for your smiles, for your gifts, for your friendship. A special thank you to my husband who organized this wonderful celebration." She looked at Raoul, standing next to her with a glass in his hand. A smile played on his face, but his eyes remained wary. "Cheers!" the guests exclaimed, raising their glasses. The celebration continued until late into the night. The guests gradually dispersed, leaving behind unfinished glasses, crumpled napkins, fading flowers and vases. During the feast, every minute was getting harder and harder for Marguerite. She watched Paulina, who seemed to be here and there, always in sight. The red dress flickered among the guests like a tantalizing light, attracting glances from the men and whispers from the women. Raoul tried to keep his distance from Paulina, but his eyes gave him away, following her every move. When she walked by, he tensed like a taut string. When she laughed, he flinched faintly, though he pretended to be completely absorbed in conversation with the next guest. "Margarita," Carmela appeared next to him with a glass of wine. "Why don't we go out on the terrace? It's cooler out there." They settled into the wicker chairs. From here they had a view of the festively lit garden where garlands of soft light hung between the trees. Several couples strolled along the paths, enjoying the evening freshness. "How are you holding up?" Carmela asked quietly. "Fine." Marguerite sipped her wine. "Just watching the spectacle. She's provoking on purpose." Carmela nodded toward Paulina, who was just walking past a group of men, swaying her hips. "That dress, those looks. She wants you to see her power over Raoul." Marguerite watched in silence as Paulina stopped at the buffet table, ostensibly to grab a canapé. Her posture was carefully calculated, back straight, chin slightly raised, one hand carelessly holding a champagne glass. She was saying something to her roommate, but her eyes kept sliding around the room in search of Raoul. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marguerite turned to her friend. "She actually thinks she's won, that she can come to my party like this and show everyone her triumph." At that moment, the musicians played a slow tune. The couples began to come to the center of the room to dance. Raoul, as a good husband should, approached Marguerite. "Shall we dance?" She allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. His hand rested on her waist, a familiar gesture that now seemed foreign. They moved slowly to the beat of the music, maintaining the perfect picture of a happy couple. "A wonderful evening," Raoul said. "Everything went exactly as I had planned." "Yes, especially Paulina's appearance in that stunning dress," Marguerite said quietly, almost softly, but felt her husband's body tense. I don't know what you mean. His voice sounded steady, but his fingers on her waist trembled faintly. Of course, she smiled, noticing Paulina watching them dance. You don't understand anything. The music ended and they dispersed, each to their own group of guests. Marguerite noticed Paulina immediately heading toward Raoul, but was intercepted by one of her co-workers. The evening continued. Waiters were serving desserts, the bartender was mixing cocktails, and the guests moved from group to group, exchanging news and gossip. Marguerite kept up the small talk, laughing at the jokes, thanking them for their congratulations. But her attention was riveted on the strange dance that was unfolding between her husband and his mistress. They carefully avoided direct contact, but they were always close to each other, at the bar, near the musicians, in a group of mutual acquaintances. Their gazes met and were immediately averted. They started a conversation and broke it off half-heartedly. They were too close or too far away from each other. Look at them, Carmela whispered when she was near them again. They're giving themselves away. Let them, Marguerite shrugged. The more obvious they act, the better. At one point, Paulina still managed to be alone with Raoul, in a far corner of the garden where the light of the garlands barely reached. Marguerite could see their silhouettes from the window as they stood close together, clearly arguing about something. Then Raoul turned abruptly and walked away, leaving Paulina alone. The young woman stood in the darkness for a few minutes, then returned to the house. Her perfect hair was slightly disheveled and an unfamiliar expression appeared on her face, a mixture of anger and confusion. "Trouble in paradise?" Marguerite asked softly as Paulina passed by. The woman flinched but quickly pulled herself together. "I don't know what you mean," she smiled her trademark smile. "Of course you don't." Marguerite saluted her with her glass. "By the way, thank you for the gift. I'm sure it's special." Something resembling fear flashed in Paulina's eyes, but she immediately turned away and hurried away. The time was approaching midnight. The guests began to leave, taking cabs or their own cars with sober drivers. Everyone had to be seen off, thanked again, and pleasantries exchanged. Paulina was one of the last to leave. She said goodbye to her colleagues for a long time, clearly delaying the moment of departure. But Raoul carefully kept away from her, busy talking with business partners. Finally, the house was empty. Only traces of the party remained. Unopened glasses, abandoned napkins, fading flowers in vases. The waiters quietly put away the dishes. The musicians put away their instruments. The last guests left well after midnight. Raoul, citing fatigue, went straight up to the bedroom. Marguerite stayed downstairs, ostensibly to see that the cleaning was finished. In fact, she needed time alone. The waiters were finishing their work, arranging chairs, folding tablecloths, packing up the rest of the food. Their movements were honed by years of practice, and they worked almost silently, like ghosts in an empty house. Rosita lay in the corner of the living room, watching every person who passed by. The dog had stayed away from the noisy crowd all evening, but now that the house was empty, she was clearly feeling calmer. Marguerite walked to the small guest room where the gifts were stacked. Boxes and bags of various sizes were piled on the sofa, and chairs, jewelry, furnishings, expensive trinkets. She slowly went through the gifts, reading the cards, trying to remember who had given what. A small box from Paulina was lying separately. Marguerite took it in her hands, looking at the elegant wrapping, cream paper, gold ribbon, a dainty bow, all flawless, just like Paulina herself. "An exclusive perfume from Paris," Marguerite murmured as she untied the ribbon. Her fingers trembled slightly, though she tried to convince herself it was just fatigue after a long day. Inside the box, in a bed of black velvet, lay a crystal vial, austere facets, gold cap, clear liquid inside. No labels or identifying marks, just a small card with the name of the perfume house in French. Marguerite twirled the bottle in her hands, scrutinizing it from every angle. Why a perfume? Why such a personal, intimate gift from a woman who clearly claimed to be her husband? Rosita, who had been lying at her feet all this time, suddenly raised her head and whimpered softly. Marguerite wanted to bring the vial to her nose, but the dog suddenly stood up and began to bark, loudly, alarmingly, not at all as usual. "Hush, girl!" Margarita tried to calm the dog, but Rosita only barked harder, backing away from the vial, which was still in her mistress's hands. Something in the dog's behavior made Margarita wary. Rosita had never reacted this way to perfume, not to her own perfume, nor to the scents of her guests. Now, there was genuine fear in her barking. Marguerite carefully placed the bottle on the table. Rosita calmed down a little, but she continued to watch the crystal container warily, whining from time to time. "What is it, girl?" Marguerite crouched down beside the dog, scratching her behind the ear. "What's got you so scared?" She picked up the vial again, but this time she didn't bring it up to her face. Instead, she carefully removed the cap and spritzed some perfume sideways onto the curtain. Rosita immediately jumped back, continuing to bark. Her reaction was so unusual that Marguerite felt a chill run down her spine. What could be in that perfume that would scare a dog so much? At that moment, Raoul's voice came from above. "What's going on up there? Why is Rosita barking?" "It's all right," shouted back Marguerite, hastily closing the vial. "She must have seen a cat in the garden." She quickly tucked the perfume back into the box and placed it on the farthest shelf of the closet. Rosita gradually calmed down, but continued to glance warily in the direction of the closet. Marguerite went back to sorting out the presents, but her thoughts were far away. She remembered the strange expression on Paulina's face as she handed over the gift, that faint fear in her eyes when Marguerite had mentioned perfume during their brief conversation at the end of the evening. The last waiters finished cleaning up and quietly said their goodbyes. The house fell into silence, broken only by the ticking of the antique clock in the hall. Marguerite walked slowly through the rooms, checking the windows and doors. Everything was back in its place: the furniture, the paintings, the vases of flowers. Only the slight odor of perfume from the curtains reminded her of the strange incident. Marguerite came closer, sniffed. The scent was unusual, with some metallic note that seemed out of place in a perfume. Rosita followed her mistress at her heels, never leaving her side. Usually the dog slept on his bed in the bedroom, but tonight he clearly did not want to leave Marguerite alone. As she climbed the stairs, Margarita thought about how Paulina was more than just her husband's mistress. There was something else about this woman, something dark and dangerous. And that perfume, it was clearly not just an expensive gift from Paris. The morning after the feast was overcast. Marguerite awoke to strange sounds as Rosita paced the room, breathing heavily and whimpering. Raoul was already gone. His side of the bed was empty and cold. "Rosita?" Marguerite sat up on the bed, turning on the bedside lamp. The dog lay on the floor, breathing heavily. Her sides heaved unevenly, as if each breath was given with difficulty. When Marguerite tried to pet her, Rosita only wagged her tail weakly. "What's wrong, girl?" Marguerite leaned toward the dog, trying to figure out what was going on. Rosita's eyes were cloudy, saliva flowing from her mouth. Suddenly Margarita remembered last night, the perfume, the dog's strange reaction. The perfume splattered on the curtain. Rosita had run past that curtain several times, sniffing and licking them while Marguerite sorted out the presents. She rushed to the phone, dialing the number of the veterinary clinic. The beeps seemed endless, until finally a sleepy voice answered, "24-hour veterinary care, listening to you." "I have a dog. She's very sick." Margarita struggled to find the words. "I think she's been poisoned by something." "What are the symptoms?" "Heavy breathing, drooling, weakness." Marguerite listed the symptoms as she watched Rosita try to rise and fall to her side again. "Bring her in immediately." The voice in the receiver became businesslike. "Do you know the address?" Margarita knew the address. They had been to this clinic more than once in the 5 years she had lived with Rosita. She dressed quickly, trying not to think about the fact that Paulina's perfume might have been more than just perfume. Wrapping Rosita in plaid, she struggled to carry the dog to the car. The Labrador was heavy, but right now Margarita felt no weight, only fear and despair. The drive to the clinic took forever, even though it was only 6 in the morning and the streets were empty. Rosita lay in the back seat, her breathing becoming more and more intermittent. They were met at the clinic by a young doctor, anxious, eyes red from sleep but focused and attentive. He quickly examined Rosita, asking a few questions. "Are you sure it's poisoning?" he asked, checking the dog's pupils. "Yes. I think—" Marguerite blanched. She couldn't say that she suspected her husband's mistress of trying to poison her with perfume. The doctor gave Rosita some injections, put in an IV. The dog lay motionless, only his chest rising faintly as he breathed. "We will do everything we can," the doctor said, "but the condition is very serious. It looks like a severe toxin." Marguerite sat in the hallway of the clinic, looking at the white walls and informational posters about vaccinations and proper pet care. Time stretched out, turning into an endless succession of minutes filled with anxiety and guilt. After 2 hours, the doctor came out of the treatment room. Margarita could tell by the look on his face before he even opened his mouth. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We did everything we could, but the toxin was too strong. She's gone." Marguerite stared at him, unable to understand how simple words could hurt so much. Rosita wasn't just a dog. She was a family member, a devoted friend, a creature who loved her unconditionally. "We can run a toxicology test," the doctor continued. "If you want to know the exact cause—" "No," Marguerite interrupted him. "I know the cause." She returned home when the sun was already high. The house greeted her with an unaccustomed silence. No one ran to the door, tail wagging. No one whimpered happily. No one poked their wet nose into her palms. Going up to the bedroom, Marguerite took out a box of perfume from the closet. The crystal bottle caught a ray of sunlight, throwing iridescent glints across the walls. So beautiful and so deadly. She remembered the look in Paulina's eyes as she handed over the gift. The fear in her eyes when they talked about spirits. Now it all made horrifying sense. It wasn't just a gift. It was an attempted murder. The perfume was meant for her, Marguerite. Paulina had expected her to use it immediately after the feast. But Rosita sensed the danger with her animal instincts and saved her mistress, paying for it with her own life. Marguerite sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the vial. Fury was rising in her in waves, displacing grief and fear. This woman hadn't just stolen her husband, she'd wanted to kill her. And now, innocent Rosita was dead because of her. The front door slammed downstairs. Raoul had returned. His footsteps on the stairs, his voice. "Darling, are you home?" Marguerite hid the vial back in the box. A plan for revenge began to form in her head, crisp, clear, ruthless. Paulina thought she could just get rid of her and take her place. Well, she had greatly miscalculated. Marguerite spent all morning in the bathroom, methodically preparing for her plan. She carefully poured the contents of the poison perfume down the toilet, flushing it 3 times. Then she rinsed the bottle with her favorite perfume that she had been using for years. Her movements were calm and precise. Her hands did not tremble. A strange numbness had overtaken her after Rosita's death, as if all her feelings had receded, giving way to cold determination. Raoul had left for work early that morning without even asking why the house was so quiet or where the dog had gone. Perhaps he simply hadn't noticed her absence, or thought Rosita was walking in the yard. His inattention, once annoying, now played into Marguerite's hands. She dressed especially carefully. A strict gray suit, high heels, impeccable makeup. Her hair was styled in a simple but elegant style. No jewelry except for her wedding ring. She wore it today on purpose, though she'd left it at home a lot lately. She put the bottle of perfume in her purse, wrapping it in a silk handkerchief. Now it was just a beautiful glass with a fragrant liquid inside. No danger, no poison. But Paulina didn't know that. On the way to Raoul's office, Marguerite turned on the radio. The announcer, in a cheerful voice, told the news, the weather forecast, and announced musical compositions. An ordinary day in their small town, where everyone knows everyone else, where news travels faster than the wind. The office building greeted her with the coolness of the air conditioners and the muffled hum of running machinery. At the reception desk sat the same girl she always did, young, friendly, with perfect manicures on her slender fingers. "Good morning, Señora Ortega," she smiled. "Señor Ortega is in a meeting right now." "I know," Margarita smiled back. "I'm here to see Señorita Escalante. Is Paulina in attendance today?" "Yes, she is in her office." The girl pointed toward the corridor, though Margarita knew the way perfectly well. Her heels clacked on the marble floor, measuring her steps toward the inevitable. The staff saw her off with glances. The boss's wife rarely appeared in the office, and after yesterday's holiday, her visit was of particular interest. Paulina's office door was ajar. She was sitting at her computer, typing something intently. She was wearing a dark blue dress, strict, businesslike, not at all like yesterday's provocative outfit. Marguerite tapped on the door jamb. Paulina looked up, and a look of surprise flashed across her face, quickly replaced by wariness. "Señora Ortega." She rose from the table. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I wanted to thank you for the gift." Margarita strode into the study, closing the door behind her. "For the perfume." Paulina froze, her fingers gripping the back of the chair. "You're welcome," she pronounced, trying to maintain equanimity. "I hope you enjoyed them?" "Oh, yes." Marguerite pulled a vial from her purse. "It's a very unusual scent. Would you like to try it?" Without waiting for an answer, she pointed the vial toward Paulina and pressed the atomizer. The spray hit the young woman's face and dress. The reaction was instantaneous. Paulina recoiled, knocking the file folders off the table. Her eyes widened with horror, her mouth opening in a wordless scream. "Help!" she finally screamed, retreating to the window. "Help! She's poisoned me!" Alarmed voices were heard in the hallway, the stomping of feet. The door swung open and several employees rushed into the office. Raoul was among them, pale, confused, with his shirt collar unbuttoned. "What's going on here?" he asked, shifting his gaze from his wife to his mistress. "She splashed perfume on me." Paulina almost sobbed, wiping her face with her hands. "The very perfume I gave her yesterday." "And what's so terrible about that?" Marguerite asked calmly. "It's just a perfume from Paris. You said so yourself." Paulina froze, realizing that she had just given herself away. Her gaze flickered between those present, who were watching the scene with bewilderment. "I'm calling an ambulance," she said in a shaky voice, pulling out her phone. "And the police. This is attempted murder." "No," Marguerite's voice sounded unexpectedly loud. "This is an exposure of attempted murder. Your attempted murder, Paulina." There was an oppressive silence in the office. Everyone present froze, digesting what they had heard. Paulina stood at the window, holding the phone to her ear, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely dial the number. "The ambulance is coming now," she said in a breaking voice. "And the police, too. You're all witnesses. She tried to poison me." Marguerite calmly placed the vial on the table. "No one poisoned anyone," she said, addressing the crowd. "This vial contains ordinary perfume, my own perfume, which I transferred here this morning. What? Paulina turned even paler. You, you changed the contents. Yes, after your gift killed my dog. Marguerite turned to Raoul. Rosita died this morning, poisoned herself when she accidentally got splashed by that perfume. Raoul shifted his confused gaze from his wife to his mistress. His face reflected a whole gamut of emotions: disbelief, fear, realization. "Paulina?" he said hoarsely. "Is it true?" The young woman opened her mouth but couldn't utter a word. A noise was heard in the hallway. It was the ambulance crew arriving. Two medics in white coats entered the office, looking around at those present. "Who needs help?" the older man asked. "Me!" Paulina rushed toward them. "I've been poisoned. She sprayed poison on me." The medic sat her in a chair and began checking her pulse, blood pressure, pupil response. Paulina sat still, letting them do their work, but her eyes were fixed on the vial on the table. "No signs of poisoning," the doctor concluded after a few minutes. "All vitals are normal." But, Paulina stammered. "That's impossible. The poison must have—" She faltered, but it was too late. Those present whispered, looking at her in horror. At that moment, two police officers, a man and a uniformed woman, entered the office. "We received a call about an attempted poisoning," the senior officer pronounced, looking around the gathering. "Who can explain what happened here?" Marguerite stepped forward. "I can," she said clearly. "Yesterday at my birthday party, this woman, Paulina Escalante, gave me a bottle of perfume. Last night my dog accidentally got splashed with that perfume and died a few hours later." The officer was making notes in his notebook. "Go ahead," he nodded. "I realized the perfumes were poisoned, poured out their contents and filled the bottle with my own perfume, then came here and splashed it on Paulina." Marguerite spoke calmly, as if recounting some ordinary incident. "She immediately started screaming about poisoning, though she couldn't have known there was poison in the vial unless she had put it there herself." The police officers looked at each other. The female officer approached Paulina, who sat with her head bowed low. "Señorita Escalante, do you have anything to say?" she asked. Paulina remained silent. Her shoulders began to shake finely and tears ran down her cheeks, smearing her mascara. "I didn't mean to," she finally whispered. I love him." She looked up at Raoul, who stood leaning against the wall as if his legs refused to hold him up. "Did you know about this?" Marguerite asked her husband. "Did you know she was planning to kill me?" "No!" Raoul jerked as if from a blow. "I swear I knew nothing. Yes, we had an affair, but I would never have allowed—" "Señorita Escalante," the senior officer interrupted him. "You are under arrest on suspicion of attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you in a court of law." The policewoman read out her rights while handcuffing Paulina. She did not resist, only continued to cry, smearing makeup on her face. The office staff crowded in the doorway, watching the scene with a mixture of horror and curiosity. Someone was already making phone calls, obviously spreading the news around town. The medics gathered their equipment and left, satisfied that their help was no longer needed. The police officers packed the perfume bottle in a plastic evidence bag. "We'll need your statement," the officer told Marguerite, "and the results of the dog's autopsy if there are any." "Unfortunately, no autopsy has been done," she replied. "But a veterinarian can confirm that death was caused by a strong toxin." A police car with its blinkers on drove Paulina away. Margarita watched the scene from her office window, noting curious passers-by stopping on the sidewalk, pointing fingers and whispering. News traveled fast in their small town. The whole story would be known to everyone by evening. The policewoman, who introduced herself as Lieutenant Hernandez, returned to the office with a cup of water. "Have a drink, Señora Ortega. It's been a hard day for you." "Thank you." Margarita took the cup but did not drink. What will happen to her now? Pre-trial detention while the investigation is ongoing. The lieutenant sat down on the edge of the table. We need to find where she acquired the poison. You can't just get substances like that. Could she have had accomplices? Raoul asked, who had been standing by the window the whole time. Possibly, Hernandez nodded. We'll check all her contacts. By the way, Senor Ortega, we need to talk to you separately. I can stay, Margarita said firmly. He's not likely to say anything I don't already know. Another policeman entered the office with a folder of documents. A long process of testimony began. Margarita went into detail about last night's party, about Paulina's gift, about Rosita's death. Was it a Labrador? Hernandez suddenly asked. Yes, Margarita felt her throat constrict. She was 5 years old. I have a Labrador too, the lieutenant said softly. They're very loyal. Raoul jerked in his chair as if those words caused him physical pain. He began his testimony in a hoarse, breaking voice. It all started 3 months ago. Paulina often stayed late at the office. Tell me more about your relationship, the second policeman interrupted him. Is that necessary? Raoul cast a quick glance at his wife. Yes, Hernandez replied stiffly. Motive is key in this case. Raoul talked at length about how it had started, how Paulina had gradually become more demanding, how she had hinted that she wanted more. Did she talk about divorce? Hernandez asked. Not directly, Raoul shook his head, but often repeated that we could have been together if it weren't for certain circumstances. Circumstances? Marguerite interjected. Is that what she called me? A heavy silence hung in the study. Raoul lowered his head. I'm sorry. I was such an idiot. Senora Ortega, Hernandez addressed her. Have you noticed any oddities in your husband's behavior in recent months? Oh yes, Margarita grinned bitterly. Constant delays at work, strange phone conversations, new clothes, the gym, the classic set of an unfaithful husband. And Senorita Escalante, what was she like at work? Professional, Raoul answered for his wife. Always collected, efficient. No one would have thought that she was capable of murder, Marguerite finished for him. And yet there were signs. Remember the way she looked at me yesterday when she gave me that perfume? There was a knock at the door. It was the secretary with a cup of coffee for the policeman. Behind her back, Marguerite could see the curious faces of the staff trying to catch a glimpse of what was going on in the office. We need to inspect Senorita Escalante's workplace, Hernandez said as she finished her coffee. Senor Ortega, can you give us access to her computer? Of course, he stood up. I'll get the system administrator. When they left, Margarita was alone with the young policeman who continued to fill out the report. I apologize for the personal question, he said suddenly, without raising his eyes from the papers. But how did you guess to change the contents of the vial? Rosita suggested it. Marguerite looked out the window, where the gray sky promised rain. She always sensed danger, and she sensed it this time too, only paid for it with her life. Raoul and Hernandez returned with the system administrator, a young guy in a crumpled shirt who was nervously adjusting his glasses. Some interesting searches were found in Senorita Escalante's computer, the lieutenant reported. A history of searching for poisons, their effects on the body. She's been preparing. I want to file for divorce, Margarita said suddenly. Everyone turned to her. Right now? Raoul asked confusedly. Why not? She shrugged. Or are you still hoping she'll get out of prison and you'll be happy together? Marguerite, please. He took a step toward her. Let's talk about this at home. No, she shook her head. There is no home anymore. There is only the empty room where Rosita slept and the vial of poison that was supposed to kill me. Lieutenant Hernandez coughed delicately. It's time for us to go to the station, to do the paperwork. Senora Ortega, we will contact you if we need any further statements. Margarita stood up, straightened the folds in her skirt. The reception area was still crowded with employees, pretending they were just passing through. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, turning to her husband. "Not the betrayal, not the lies. It's that you let her come to my party, to look me in the eye, giving me poisoned perfume. That's not just treason, that's complicity." "I didn't know!" he exclaimed. "I swear I knew nothing of her plans." "But you created the conditions," replied Marguerite quietly. "You gave her an opportunity. You let her into our home, and now that home is gone." She left the study, walked through the subdued office. Her heels tapped clearly on the marble floor, counting down the last steps of her former life. Behind her, she heard Raoul's voice saying something to the policeman, but she didn't turn around. In the elevator, she caught her reflection in the mirrored wall. Strict suit, impeccable hair, calm face. Only in her eyes there was pain, the pain of betrayal, of loss, of a ruined life. As she left the office building, she thought of Rosita, of her devoted eyes, of her soft fur, of her joyful barking when she met her. The dog had given her life to save her mistress, and the mistress avenged her by ruining the murderer's plans. It was beginning to rain outside. Margarita did not open her umbrella, let the drops wash away the remnants of her former life. Somewhere in the city, Paulina was sitting in a holding cell. Somewhere in the office, Raoul was trying to pick up the pieces of his shattered reputation, and she walked forward, feeling a strange lightness, as if she had gotten rid not only of her traitorous husband and his mad mistress, but also of the part of herself that had allowed them to deceive themselves for so long. 2 weeks passed. Life in the city was gradually returning to normal. People were finding new topics for gossip. The newspapers were writing about other incidents. The story of the poisoned perfume and Paulina's arrest had faded into the background, though there was still whispering in the corners of Raoul's office about the former employee. Margarita parked the car outside the modern glass and concrete building where her lawyer's office was located. She had deliberately chosen a lawyer in an expensive part of town, not because she didn't trust the local experts, but because she didn't want to give new food for gossip. The reception area smelled of coffee and expensive perfume. The receptionist, a young woman with a perfect manicure, smiled welcomingly. "Señor Ortega is already waiting in the lawyer's office." "Thank you." Margarita adjusted the collar of her white blouse. Today she was dressed especially carefully. Dark blue suit, pearl earrings, medium-heeled shoes. The impeccable image of a successful woman who knew what she wanted. Raoul was indeed already there, sitting in a leather armchair, nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest. At the sight of his wife, he stood up, but she gestured for him to stop. "No need for ceremony. Let's get this over with quickly." The lawyer, an older man with an attentive gaze, spread the papers on the table. "Everything is ready to be signed. I have taken into account all your wishes regarding the division of property." Margarita sat down in the chair, took a pen. The papers were dry and official. No hint of 20 years of life together, of shared dreams, of a devoted dog killed by the poison of a mistress. "Here and here," the lawyer indicated the places for signatures. Marguerite put her signature, clear, confident, without hesitation. "Now you, Señor Ortega." Raoul picked up the pen. His fingers trembled slightly. "Margarita, perhaps—" "No," she shook her head. "Just sign." He leaned over the documents. His graying temples, his slumped shoulders read weariness and defeat. The last signature lay on the paper, finalizing their marriage. "Congratulations," the lawyer said dryly. "You are free to go." They walked out of the office together, taking the elevator down in silence. At the entrance to the building, Raoul finally spoke. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know I never stopped loving you." "Love?" Marguerite grinned. "That's a strange kind of love you have, Raoul. It smells of betrayal and poisoned perfume. I did not know of her plans. He took a step toward her. I swear, if I had only guessed. But you set the stage. She adjusted her purse on her shoulder. You let her into our lives, and now that life is over. Goodbye, Raoul. She got into the car without looking back. His figure flashed in the rearview mirror, alone, lost in the middle of the sidewalk. Carmela was waiting for her at home. They'd agreed to meet after the papers were signed. Her friend opened the door with her key and had time to make coffee. "How's it going?" she asked, pouring the flavored beverage into cups. "Quick and clean." Margarita sat down at the kitchen table, like extracting a sore tooth. "Did he try to say anything?" "Of course. Talked about love, about not knowing about Paulina's plans." She sipped her coffee. "You know, the weird thing is, I almost believe he really didn't know, but that doesn't change anything." They were quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city was noisy. Cars passing, dogs barking, children screaming. Ordinary life that went on no matter what. "I have an idea," Margarita said suddenly. "Come with me." "Where to?" Carmela raised her eyebrows in surprise. "You'll see," Marguerite smiled enigmatically. "It's important." They drove through the city, pulling into the outskirts where private houses drowned in verdant gardens. Near one of them, Marguerite parked the car. "A nursery," Carmela guessed when she saw the sign. They were greeted by a friendly middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Maria. She led them to the backyard where puppies of various breeds played in spacious enclosures. "We have little ones for every taste," Maria smiled. "Labradors, sheepdogs, retrievers." "No," Margarita interrupted her gently. "Not a Labrador. No one will replace Rosita." They walked for a long time between the enclosures. The puppies ran up to the netting, wagging their tails, yapping, trying to lick their hands through the bars. In the far corner of the yard, Margarita stopped. There, in a separate enclosure, sat a small red dog with intelligent eyes. "It's a mestizo," Margarita explained. "A girl, 3 months old, very smart and affectionate." The puppy came up to the grate, looked at Margarita carefully. There was something special in his gaze, as if he understood everything and offered to start life anew. "May I take her in my arms?" Marguerite asked. Maria opened the enclosure. The puppy immediately jumped into Marguerite's arms, rubbed its wet nose against her neck. "Oh, it's so cute!" Carmela exclaimed. "Look how she picked you out." "Actually, I picked her." Marguerite smiled, but the puppy was already licking her face, clearly disagreeing with that statement. "You know," Carmela said suddenly, looking at the neighboring enclosure where a black and white puppy was hanging around. "I think I'll get a dog, too. Been thinking about it for a long time." They spent almost 2 hours at the kennel, picking out puppies, filling out paperwork, listening to care tips. When they finally got ready to leave, they each had a happy puppy sitting in their arms. "What are you going to name her?" Carmela asked, getting comfortable in the passenger seat. Marguerite looked at the red-headed little girl, who had already settled into the back seat and was looking out the window at the world with interest. "Esperanza," she said. "Hope." At home, the first thing they did was to get the puppies settled. They laid out soft bedding, set out bowls of water and food, and arranged the toys they'd bought at the pet store along the way. Esperanza immediately began to explore the territory, sniffing every corner, everything. She stopped by the bedding where Rosita used to sleep, sniffing it carefully. "Clever girl," Margarita whispered, watching the puppy delicately go around the place and settle down on the new bedding. They spent the evening together, Marguerite, Carmela, and the 2 puppies, who became fast friends and scurried around the house playing with each other. Their friends' laughter mingled with happy yapping as the house resounded with life again. As Carmela got ready to leave, Marguerite walked her to the door. "Thank you for being there for me all this time," she said. "That's what friends are for," Carmela hugged her. "Everything is going to be okay. You're starting a new life." Marguerite returned to the living room, where Esperanza was already asleep on her bedding, curled up in a cozy ball of red hair. The fire crackled in the fireplace, and dusk was falling outside the window. She sat back in her chair, looking at the sleeping puppy. 20 years of marriage were over. Rosita had died, saving her life. Paulina awaited trial in prison. But here, in this room, a little lump of hope was falling asleep, a creature that had already begun to fill the void in her heart.